You're watching the Sunbeam Alpine channel, and shortly you'll be watching Trevor Hibdige explain in detail how a carburetor works and how to get twin 40 DCOE Webers in tune and running well. At over an hour long, this is easily the longest video that we've ever published, but it's edited down from several hours of conversation with Trevor. What he says in the video is absolutely fascinating, and I simply couldn't edit it down to make it any shorter. Trevor is a chemist, an engineer, and a successful classic car racing driver. Unlike many people who appear on the internet, he really knows what he's talking about. He restores and services Weber DCOE carburetors. He machines and 3D prints rare and unobtainable parts for them, and he knows them inside out. More importantly, he is prepared to be contacted directly and will share his knowledge and help anyone who needs assistance with the DCOE carburation. I've messed around with engines for nigh on 40 years now, but I've never had carburation explained quite in the way that Trevor does. If you're a Weber 40 enthusiast, trying to get the maximum performance from your engine, or just someone that really wants to understand how carburetors work, I would recommend that you choose a time when you could settle down and watch this video uninterrupted. It deserves to get your full attention. Enjoy. You're watching the Sunbeam Alpine channel. This channel is a video workshop manual for the Alpine. It's run for the benefit of all Alpine owners, so hopefully you'll subscribe to the channel and like our videos. Now today, we're not in Oily Puddle's garage, we're in Trevor Hibdige's garden, and we're here to speak to Trevor about carburetors, or more specifically, the Weber 40 DCOE carburetors, of which Trevor's very keen on. Carburetors, yeah. I mean, you like to run twin 40 DCOEs on your Alpine. Can you tell us what it is that you like about them?
I think it represents the pinnacle of carburetor design before fuel injection started coming in. They look romantic, they look exotic, they look a properly engineered. I'm an engineer, and they're made in the most esoteric way imaginable. They didn't spare any expense. They made it so that it could be changed, and changed very easily, so it would cover a whole range of applications.
Well, there's a lot of people who will agree with you. I mean, the DCOE aficionados, you see a lot of them at the various Alpine meetings with their engines there, with the twin 40s on, they look great. But also, a lot of people said, oh, I've tried them and I had lumpy tick over and I had flat spots. And I'm scared of them. I mean, I look at them, I'm scared. But I read on the internet your posts about this is why it does these things, this is how to get the most out of it. And I thought, well, I've got to come and speak to this man, because there's a lot of Alpine owners who would love to know just a fraction of your knowledge. So how come you can get so much out of them and other people can struggle?
There's a reason for every single complaint about the DCOE.
Right.
Some of the reasons are incredibly simple. I would say 90% of the problems are air leaks. The flat spot, the stutter, the stumble, whatever you want to call it, that's a really easily fixed item when you understand what causes the problem.
Okay.
My approach to the carburetor and our engines has been, from an engineering point of view, how does a carburetor work and why is it not working? And the problem with DCOEs is that there are 5 fueling circuits in each barrel. So we've got one carburetor here on twin carbs. We've got 4 barrels with 5 circuits on each. So there are 20 circuits that you can mess up. And tinkering with a Weber DCOE normally ends up in it even worse. So it's the understanding of how it works that helps you find the solution to stop it doing what it's doing. And as I said, the biggest one is leaks. And that's down to several factors that are unique to our Alpines. When you bolt the manifold, there's nothing to do with the carburetor. When you bolt the manifold onto your cylinder head, the very two outside bolts are shared between the exhaust manifold and the inlet manifold. And we have a big washer that goes between the two, and one single bolt tightens it up. That relies on the exhaust manifold and the inlet manifold being exactly the same thickness. If they're not, you get uneven makeup. And if you get uneven makeup, you get air leaks. So the engine sucks air in instead of fuel, and one of the cylinders runs weak or differently, and you get lumpy running and it won't tick over. So how do we fix the leak? That's manifold. That's nothing to do with the carburetor. But the carburetor sandwich between here and the manifold has a rubber seal. That rubber seal, Hibdige tried to improve on the Alpine manifold by putting a groove in the manifold and a big O-ring. That works quite well, but then people go and over tighten it. There needs to be vibration isolation between the carburetor and the engine. Webers don't like being vibrated, and they don't like being away from the horizontal. I think they've got a specification of 5 degrees from horizontal is the most that they'll put up with. But the other thing is, if you vibrate them, the fuel in the float chamber starts to froth, and you end up sucking in froth instead of fuel, and the mixture is awful, and it blows back through the carburetors. There's been the odd fire from the air filter catching fire from a spitting back. And all in all, once we understand each part of the fueling circuit, we can address the issues that people complain about. Spitting back, inadequate power when you just touch the throttle, flooding when you stamp your foot on the throttle, and feeling strangled at high RPM.
Trevor, on your cars, when you put the twin 40s into your Alpine, do you keep the cross brace under the bonnet?
Most people remove the cross brace because they can't get the carburetors in the space available.
Right.
The Alpine inner wing has got a couple of extra strengthening bits in it, in the folds. And if you try and put standard, what are they, 55mm trumpets on a standard cut and welded manifold, since they've got to be horizontal, they touch the wing. People shorten the trumpets. That's a whole subject in itself. They try and fit it in. They do all sorts of things. You can drive without the brace. The comment that I got from the old Hibdige paperwork that I've got is, spirited driving is not allowed without the bracing. The car twists too much, you get scuttle shake, you get all sorts of things going on. So do we need the brace? We ought to keep it. There have been some beautiful engineered solutions to changing the brace. There's a standard dodge that people do, moving it and shortening it. I've seen beautiful hoops.
Yeah, I've seen the hoops.
I've seen the airbox sculpted out so that the brace goes through, not through the airbox, but actually fits almost perfectly. But what that does is strangle number 4, stops the air going into number 4, because you've cut down the plenum chamber, which is what the orange box on the originals was designed to do. So my solution was, does anyone make a different manifold? Because what we've all been doing is we take the H120 or GLS manifold. There the engine was installed at an angle to get lower bonnet line.
Yeah, it's a Hunter GLS job, isn't it?
Yeah. And the manifold then had to have an angle cast in it to keep the carburetors horizontal. So if you put that manifold in an Alpine, the carbs point downwards. I spent a good week with one of the Alpine guys trying to get the standard manifold working. He hadn't cut it to the right angle, and we tried to see whether we could get it to work not horizontal, and the conclusion was no, it does not work if it's not horizontal. So you've got to do something. You either cut the existing manifold and make it so that the faces are parallel because the engine's upright in an Alpine, or you look for a different solution. And there's a company called Redline. They're Australian. They're a bunch of racers, car racers. I think one of them must have had an Alpine because they developed an Alpine manifold, and it's the swan neck, gooseneck, or S shape, lots of different names. But basically it comes out and up and lifts the carburetors by 3 3/4, 2 inches. So the carbs actually come up and clear the inner wing. So solution for the strut problem is maybe not a standard manifold.
This is the red line manifold. There you can see, as Trevor described, coming up and then going back to horizontal. So Trevor, this is a standard manifold, inlet manifold from
GLS manifold.
GLS, not been cut yet, so it's still for the slanted engine, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so if you were going to put that on an Alpine, what they've done for many years is cut that and re-weld it straight. Is that correct?
Cut and shut.
Cut and shut.
Cut there, machined off at the right angle so that the two faces are parallel.
Yeah, and then you'd re-weld it. Right back to the early days of the very first Alpine guide they were describing doing that.
Yes.
So this is your red line.
That's a Redline manifold. S shape, swan neck, lifts the carburetors.
Yeah.
Quite clever idea.
And what about these? Is this some kind of anti-vibration thing sitting in there?
Yeah, the whole bay one is grooved to take an O-ring.
Yeah.
The normal mounting method uses what's called a MySab plate.
Right.
MySab's a Swedish company, a bit like Hoover make vacuum cleaners. The MySab plate is the standard for sealing. It's a metal plate the shape of that with a rubber O-ring cast into it.
Right.
So it's an anti-vibration mount. The problem with it is the rubber perishes very easily, very quickly, is prone to over tightening. So I use these nylon plates, probably got one in a box to show you. It's a nylon spacer with an O-ring both sides. So it acts as a thermal barrier and double vibration mounting. Disadvantage, it pushes it 6 mil that way, closer to the inner wing. So, you can't do it on a standard manifold.
Okay.
Now, we were talking earlier about the problems of sharing that bolt. Look at the difference in thickness between these two. So there's no way without machining that you could get the exhaust that came off of to fit on that.
Yeah, you can see the difference easily there.
Yeah. And if you've got a cast iron exhaust as opposed to a tubular exhaust.
Yeah.
So this one's been machined to specifically fit my exhaust system on the Alpine.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what a beautiful piece of kit that is.
I do have complaints. The standard distances that the whole world works to between the carburetors, this is different.
Right.
The gap is slightly bigger. So I had to machine a little bit out of the middle there to get the clearance. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then the orange box won't fit on it because the bolt centers are slightly wrong.
Right. So when I say the machine bit, is that the?
See that
Yeah.
was cast flat.
Yeah. You've.
I had to cut that out so that the throttle would go. When I first put it on, I couldn't get less than 3,000 RPM on tick over.
Okay.
And that was because the throttle stop wouldn't go back. On this one, there's a huge gap in between the two carburetors, so not an issue.
Yeah.
Whereas
Okay.
that's part of the strengthening wedding.
Okay, that's very interesting.
This one was sent to me with a pair of carbs for refurbishing. He could not get it working, and he had air leaks. We determined that there were massive air leaks in it. I refurbished the carbs, put them back on the manifold, and I could not get them to seal. It didn't matter what I did. And when I started looking, if you look at this end flange compared to the other ones, it's out of line. And it's out of line because it's cracked at the back.
Oh.
Now that had some filler stuck in it to attempt to fix it. But basically this manifold's scrap, because the more you do that up, the more it pulled over. You just could not seal the end carburetor.
Can that be aluminium welded and repaired?
It could. Whether it's worth it, I just leave it on the bench to remind me to. I think there's another crack in this one as well. You just about see it in there.
Number 2. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
And somebody has stuck some plastic padding or metal epoxy to try and seal it. Shame.
Yeah, real shame.
But these are not in short supply.
Right. Okay, Trevor, even me as a non-DCOE lover, I can see how nice that setup looks. One of the things that first made me think I wanted to talk to you about all this was the post you put on the internet where you were educating people about resonance and about scavenging from one cylinder to another. That was absolutely fascinating. I read it and reread it, and I thought, I've got to talk to this man.
Oh, thank you.
Can you tell me a bit more about that? Because people will be interested in how that works.
Well, I wrote that specifically to try and settle an argument on trumpets.
Right.
People have 5mm trumpets, 50mm trumpets, 100mm trumpets, and people cut them down. You see some installations. Number 3, they remove the trumpets so that the cross brace can fit. So and they get rid of that tube. But now the diagonal cross brace can actually fit through and no problem. But we've now changed one of the carburetors dramatically from how it's designed to operate. And we tune our exhaust pipes by deliberately running the pipes a further distance so that we can scavenge the outlet from one with the outlet from a matched pair 1 and 4, 2 and 3 in a typical firing order. If we've got a 4-2-1 exhaust system, if we go 4-1, then they all are collected together, and those 4 distances must be equal. I saw a cast iron manifold off of a Mark II Scepter where the 4 exhausts came into one common header and out at the end. So number 1 has traveled a lot further distance than number 4, and that doesn't destroy performance, but it doesn't optimize performance. Our engines are disgustingly undertuned. Roots made a bog standard design with 70 or 80 horsepower. Holbay took it, did a few mods to it and got 120 horsepower out of it. They detuned it because they thought that people would kill themselves. They can't handle 120 horsepower. So the standard Holbay is 105. But the inlet trumpet forms an air column all the way. We've got a good example here. So let's get rid of the swan neck and put that there. So if you can imagine the air going into this single cylinder, we've got a direct path from open air to inside the cylinder. So this overall length from the tip of the trumpet to the inlet forms an air column. Now that length resonates at a specific frequency. That we can use to our advantage, but what control do we have over that is the length of the trumpet. We can change the length of the trumpet, we can make it longer, we can make it shorter, provided we got the space on the inner wing. But the shorter you make that overall length, the higher the frequency that the pressure boost occurs. And the way we see that is the RPM of the engine. So every time the cylinder sucks in a charge, we get a pressure pulse. If you imagine that's happening at 200 times a second or whatever, whatever the number is, we have a fundamental vibration frequency at some speed of air going through there. Change the length, go longer, that occurs at a lower speed, go shorter, it occurs at a higher speed. So trumpet lengths are critical. If you remove the trumpet to clear the strut or cut it down short, I'm sure we've got some pictures of that. A lot of people have done that. You get one of the cylinders performing different to the others. The engine runs lumpy. We want smooth, balanced power. Otherwise, you complain, oh, those Webbers are no good. So if you time that properly, that pressure pulse increases the pressure on the inlet compared to the outlet. And we all know how turbos work. They boost the pressure on the inlet, so you can get your fuel charge into the cylinder quicker. But that happens at a very specific frequency. With the tolerances on all these, let's say somewhere between 2000 and 2500 RPM. So we get an artificial power boost from that column of air,
Right.
in relation to the trumpet. So if I take that trumpet off, I've now got a different length, much shorter, so that will happen at a higher frequency. So on racing cars that are designed to do 7,000 RPM down the back straight most of their life, you'll have very short trumpets on. And that's because they want that resonant frequency to occur at very high RPM. I generally don't rev mine over 5,000 RPM. I like the low end torque, so I'm running fairly long trumpets. I think they're slightly longer than standard, maybe 5mm longer than standard. And that puts my vibration frequency about 2,200. The way we notice that is you will hear a Weber carburetor snarl at you as you accelerate. As you go through the rev range, you'll hear the noise and an RPM increase, and then suddenly it'll go loud and it's like it's snorting at you. And that's the resonant frequency.
So you can tune when that happens by changing the
Yes.
length of this one part, this one trumpet part.
The total length is the effect. So if you look at this one, we've got a different length from there to there.
Right.
So this would resonate with the carburetor at a different frequency. So you change that to suit the whole thing,
Yeah.
and get it where you want it.
Yeah.
Now I had mine working at peak torque, not peak power, and peak torque's what, 2,750? So it's under 3, it depends on the camshaft, but under 3,000 RPM is where the engine has got its maximum torque. And if you coincide that pressure pulse with it, you get slapped in the back for 500 RPM. Plus it makes a lovely noise.
Mm.
So that's what I do with these. Now, not every trumpet is created equal. I think I sent you, somebody did some experiments with different shaped trumpets. Some of them actually decrease the amount of air going in because they're so inefficient. But the shape of the inlet radius is extremely important. There's some very cheap trumpets out there on the market. They're cheap for a reason, because they don't work.
Trevor, I've got this sheet here which details different ram pipe shapes, and I know you've got lots of information about all these different lengths and how to make these things perform. Are you happy if any Alpine owners want to contact you directly and just chat about Webbers? Would you be happy for us to put your contact details at the end of the video?
I'm very, very happy. At the moment, I get sheepish phone calls from people who say, I understand that you know a bit about Webbers. I've got this problem. Do you mind? Can you help? I love helping it. I've learned so much about Weber carburetors, and I've reached the age where I need to share that information rather than keep it to myself. Really happy to
Okay,
chat to people.
well, I'll put your contact details later in the video. I mean, on this sheet about shapes, some of them, people are going out and spending their money to buy like a different shaped trumpet, and the performance is going down. It cannot improve. I
Yeah,
mean,
the design of the leading edge of the trumpet affects the way in which air is induced into the barrel.
right.
A good trumpet can entrain extra air and increase the flow just by putting a trumpet on it. And a badly shaped trumpet can reduce the flow. So sticking a trumpet on that looks really good can actually ruin the performance of your car.
So one of them is reducing performance by 6.7%. Is that for each barrel?
That's for each barrel. That is the airflow compared to no trumpet.
Yeah.
So the airflow at steady state with an acceptable pressure drop across it is whatever the standard conditions were. And sticking this trumpet on, which is just a straight parallel tube,
Yeah.
reduces the flow rate by 6.7% through it. Whereas putting a little rounded edge on it can improve the flow. Putting a rolled edge on it can improve it even better. Looking at the designs here, there are some, this little stub stack, which is just a rolled edge. I used to use those on SU carburetors. I used to race a TR3, 1956 TR3, and the SU carbs had them on them. And I never found out why. I understand now why. That just improves the flow without doing anything. So free airflow into your engine.
Okay, well, if you want to talk more or contact Trevor more about this, his email will be shown later on in the video, and you can email your questions to him. I'm sure he'll be happy to help you. Well, Trevor, it's a beautiful bit of kit. We've established that. How about you take one apart and talk us through the different bits and what we should look for?
Yeah, can do. I guess the starting point is this is a 40 DCOE, but there are lots of different types of DCOEs. They have a number after them. This one is a 34. The Holbeis ran a 34 and a 35. One's a front carburetor. The other, I think the 35 is the back, and the 34 is the front.
Right.
There are 40 DCOE 18s, 23s, 33s. Alfa Romeo had a specific carburetor number. Lotus,
So I can't just go on eBay and buy 40 DCOEs, then I've got to know what I'm buying.
If you bought a 40 DCOE 18 and stuck it on an Alpine, it wouldn't work. Holbeis they got these specifically made for the GLS, and it incorporates two features that are not on any other carburetor. The Holbeis jet inspection cover, that's what this is on the top. The jet inspection cover allows you to get at the jets. So you've got a pair of jets here for this barrel. You've got a pair of jets there for that barrel.
Yeah.
This carburetor shares the same float chamber. So this is the float chamber, like a toilet cistern. So the fuel comes in and there's a float that goes up and down, keeps it full at the right level. So this jet inspection cover on a whole bay Weber has got a spacer in it, castellated spacer. What this does is allow the float chamber to vent. Normally, the float chamber vents through a big hole here, and on every other Weber, there's a big hole here.
Yeah.
Problem with that is there was an orange box that sat on here with an air filter at the end. So the orange box ran under slight vacuum as a plenum chamber. The disadvantage of using a slight vacuum as the reference point is the calibration on all these jets was completely out. So they couldn't use that as the reference point. So they had to provide an atmospheric reference on the top. Now that vent there, or this vent here, is why you can always smell petrol on a Weber carburetor. You go, there must be a fuel leak. No, the fuel is open to atmosphere. Another reason why they stopped using that is the gasket that comes. If you put it on upside down, it will still fit, but there has to be a hole in the gasket to line up with that vent. And people put them on upside down and nothing works. So that is a critical component. And people leave their lids off and go for a drive and lose that. You can't buy these anymore. I 3D print them purely because somebody said, oh, I need one. Oh, you can't buy them. So the solution to this coming off, or you forgetting to do it, this is an old racer trick, is you wire the bloody lid on. So you stick.
Yeah, makes
It's
sense.
just a little tag, stops you losing it. But yeah, that's access to the chambers, and that's different for the 3435. I think later H120s used a 9192, which had different internals, but specific to the 3435 are some very important parts for the tuning of the engine. So when we start stripping it down, I mean, we can take the top off of this. This is a float chamber. It's a toilet system. As simple as I can make it. So these, one toilet system for 2 barrels. That lifts off. Beautiful floats, brass. The replacements you get these days are plastic, nylon. Nylon is affected by ethanol. So's brass. So's solder. What's going to happen to these long term? I don't know. I'll try and avoid using ethanol. But huge amount of complex bits and pieces in here. But as you remember that there's 1 barrel here with its associated circuit, 1 barrel there. So everything is doubled up. If you look, you've got 2 of those. You've got 2 of these. You've got 2 of those. You've got everything's doubled up. So there's the first thing. It's not as complicated as it looks. There's just twice as many of everything, purely because each one is dedicated. And by the time you add another one, you've now got 4 barrels. So we've got 8 of those. Complicated? No, it's not. It's simple, but it's not easy. So we go through the individual bits and pieces. I guess we'll start learning a little bit more. This has fuel in it up to, let's say, that level. And when we consume fuel, the float drops and opens up a valve, and just toilet system. Nothing special about that. The valve under here wears out and no longer seals. Can you see that one in there?
Yeah.
That's a standard component for all carburetors. They all have this little on-off valve. Yeah. SU carbs and Webers and Solex. That's the way we get fuel into the fuel chamber. We're starting at the air end,
right,
and see where the air goes when the engine starts sucking. Okay. Because we can remove the trumpet, and then we've got this very, very unique whole bay edition. This extender tube only occurs on the whole bay DCOE. Okay. And I've machined these for other carburetors for people, because this cures a specific problem we'll talk about in a minute. We can pull this out. This is called the auxiliary venturi, and this contains the place where the petrol mixture educts into the system and into the engine. So the fuel actually comes out that little hole there. Fuel comes into there, out through there, and into the engine and mixes with the air. Carburetors work on a venturi effect. The venturi effect is where air changes speed on a curved surface, you get a pressure reduction. So it actually creates a lower pressure. And the venturi in a DCOE or in a weather carburetor, venturis come in different sizes. This one is 30mm cast into it. The venturi is a critical part of matching the carburetor to the engine. People think, well, I've put a bigger venturi in, it will go faster. No, it doesn't work like that. That creates the pressure drop that the system works on, and having got that, you've then got the air path straight through. So there's nothing in the way between the outside world and the inlet valve. So we squirt the petrol into the fuel injection would physically squirt it. The Weber carburetor educts it, aspirates it, and squirts it. There's actually an accelerator pump built into it that squirts petrol out of the accelerator pump jet, which you can see sticking down there.
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah. So that'll actually squirt liquid petrol in as long as your foot's moving down on the throttle.
Yeah.
So back to normal. We've got fuel. Let's talk about the first fueling circuit. The first fueling circuit is tick over, idle mixture screw. People mess around with the idle mixture thinking it'll change stuff when you're running in a straight line. That's a straight needle valve against a white background.
Yep.
You can get pointed needle valves, blunt needle valves, extra fine needle valves. Some of them have got rubber seals on. Paul Marshall's actually got some ones machined with a much finer needle on them. So they are particularly good for fine tuning. But all this does is control the amount of fuel that comes out of the idle hole. I've got some graphics for you.
That little tiny hole there. That's
that
the
little
idle
tiny
hole.
hole there. That, with the foot off of the throttle, this brass plate is closed.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of air coming past it. You get fuel coming out of there, controlled by this tap. Yes, it's a fine tap, but it comes out of that tiny little hole, and it gets its fuel from the misnamed idle jet. Now this little one here is the idle jet. Now the idle jet sits in a holder, which some people find they can't get that out. The idle jet is a very simple, it's got a metered hole at the bottom. It works just like a main jet. It sucks fuel up into it and mixes it with a little bit of air coming through the top, and then it comes out the side and goes down the drilling, which you can see there, down there,
yeah.
and along that line,
yeah.
and comes out at this point.
Yeah.
This thing in front of it is very important. We'll talk about that in a minute. So that's the path for the fuel for the idle mixture. You adjust that to balance the carburetors out so that it ticks over smoothly. There are lots of good procedures on the internet for setting the idle screw. The one that you need, buzzword, lean best idle. So you screw it in until it just affects the tick over, and then you open it up 90 degrees, quarter of a turn, and then that's set. The issue comes when you touch the throttle. The moment you touch the throttle, this butterfly opens. And the moment that butterfly opens, this idle jet doesn't do anything. So as soon as you touch that throttle, the engine needs more fuel, but the main jet, the big one, hasn't started working yet. As I said, there are 5 fueling circuits. So we start off with the idle jet, and to transfer to the main jet, we need to do something in between. And the way that the DCOE does it, it has what are called progression holes. And those progression holes are fixed diameter holes. They sit underneath this cover. And you can see in there are 3 progression holes on this particular one. I've got a little video that you can embed at this point, because if you shine a torch in here, you can actually see the progression holes becoming uncovered.
We'll do that. Progression holes, right? Okay.
Yep, these progression holes, as soon as we touch the throttle and this plate moves,
Yeah.
we need more fuel added to this mixture.
Right.
The main jet isn't working yet, so just touching the throttle uncovers one of those, the first progression hole. If I do it, can you see?
Yeah,
right,
I could see them in there.
you can see the 3 of them here.
Yeah.
So progression hole 1, now I've got 2, now I've got 3.
Right.
Most of the driving on that we do on a DCOE, you're running on progression holes. You haven't even got the main jet. So 30 miles an hour constant speed, you're running on 2 progression holes. Now the progression holes get their fuel from the same feed that does the idle mixture.
Right.
So this idle jet is misnamed because it does more than idle. It's actually the progression circuit.
It is.
So when you just touch the throttle, you open up one of those holes and you get the stumble, you get the flat spot, you get a momentary weak mixture until the revs come up. Now that is idle jet. Some people actually drill out the progression holes, make them bigger. There's Weber only make 2 versions of this carburetor now. One of them is a 40 DCOE 151 and the other is a 45 DCOE 152. They're the numbers. Now the 152 comes with 3 progression holes, but the racer boys have got a standard mod. They drill a 4th hole in a certain position to give you 4 progression holes, and that is actually commercially available as a 152G because Great Britain does it, and it's unique to the 152. I've got a set of drills that run from 0.035 of a millimeter to 0.15 of a millimeter. So these are about 0.1 or less of a millimeter. Very, very accurate, controlled holes. I got sent a carburetor 2 weeks ago that had a disgusting flat spot that could not be tuned out, and one of the holes had a bit of shit in it and was blocking it. It was really difficult to get out because I had to run one of these tiny little drills down through it, but we got it out and he's installing them now. So these holes are critical. The progression holes affect the flat spot and they provide the fueling before the main jet takes over. Now, the Weber has an accelerator pump. So as long as your foot is moving downwards, this thing is a pump which squirts petrol in through the accelerator pump jet. Now the accelerator pump jet is directionally keyed. It's got a flat on it. It'll only go in one particular direction, and that direction is such that the tiny hole at the end, the pump jet itself, faces into the engine. If you ever strip one down, please note that the accelerator pump jet has a mini gasket washer on it. Can you see it?
Yeah.
That normally gets left in that hole, or people lose it, or people leave it out. There's a standard problem because that will suck air in. So that only goes in one way and goes down. So that's the accelerator pump jet. That sucks in fuel. This is just a straight pump. It sucks in fuel from the float chamber via this little thing at the bottom here. That's a non-return valve. So it fills up when you do that, and when you push down, that non-return valve closes. These have a habit of sticking open and the accelerator pump doesn't work. So that's a really good failure point. Bit of muck underneath that, non-return valve doesn't work. These come out with a little spring-loaded plate on the top. So all this is a piston that goes down through and sucks and blows. Nice and easy. And that is just fits literally with a spring plate. Like that. These come out a similar way. This is a different circuit. We'll talk about that one shortly. This thing is the throttle return spring. So there's a big spring under here that closes these. If they don't close, you can't get a decent tick over. So there's a big spring underneath there that you access by removing this cover plate here. So still nice and easy. We're on the progression holes. When we open the throttle enough so that they're all uncovered, the engine is sucking quite hard now on this barrel. So the main jets start to supply fuel. So the main fuel comes out of this big hole here. That big hole is directly connected to this well. This is the jet well, main jet well. Main jet, idle jet. That's for that barrel, main jet, idle jet for that barrel. Everything's duplicated, makes it look twice as complicated as it actually is. So fuel coming out there, that's not really efficient in terms of dribbling into the inlet. So that's where the auxiliary venturi comes in, because that hole lines up with that one on the inside, and then the fuel comes out of this little tiny chamfered hole there. So can you see?
Yep.
This is available in two sizes, 4.5mm or 3.5mm. The difference is the equivalent circle that would have the same area of that. So 3.5mm diameter hole or a 4.5. But this assembly is an internal ring to allow low velocity air to cause more of an effect on mixing with that. When it's going fully, the air goes everywhere, and this extender tube comes all the way out into fresh air. Now people cut these off because they foul the inner wing. People remove them because they get in the way. These tubes are critical. They were a whole bay addition that was designed to get away from the pressure pulses that are going on in here. Every time the engine sucks, you get pressure pulses going on. So the negative pressure caused by the venturi inside there. It's going up and down, up and down. What this does is go to the free air outside and get a far more stable atmospheric pressure reference for the air flowing through to the jets. Some people say another reason why they did that is the carburetor spit back and you get a lot of fuel vapor here, so it gives clean air. Not sure about that one, but certainly the pulsation damping effect that it provides. I've fitted these to 45 DCOE Webers, and one racer contacted me with a 48 DCO Weber, huge thing, that he was putting a supercharger on, and he wanted these made for the 48. So we machined some specially up. These are no longer available from Weber along with those, so we make those because we have to.
Right.
So the main jet well comes from, this is the main jet, and comes out through there into the side and is dispensed via the auxiliary venturi into the airflow. The problem you have with high revving engines, and don't forget this was a racing carburetor, that at 7,000 RPM down the main straight, there's an awful lot of suction going on. And the problem with sucking back through here is that the level between the float chamber and the jet well, which is how deep? So that's the jet well. The jet well is that deep. So the fuel level is sucked up the jet well and makes the mixture too rich because the height keeps changing, and the height is the thing that feeds the fuel into it. So you've got to break the suction somehow at high revs.
Right.
And what the DCOE does, other carburetors do it as well, is the main jet assembly is exactly as it sounds. It's an assembly. That's a jet holder. That does nothing more than hold it. But the jet assembly consists of a fuel jet, available in different sizes, and an air corrector. Now, people don't know what the air corrector does. What this does is let air into there when it's sucking really hard. So it breaks the vacuum, it lets air in. So the bigger the hole, the more air it lets in. The bigger the hole there, the more fuel it lets in. So we actually tune the engine based on what RPM are you expecting to do? How are you expecting to drive it? Do you want maximum power at high RPM, or do you want a bit more fuel economy at 70 miles an hour on the motorway and overdrive top? Because changing the air corrector jet does exactly that. Now, these were set up for 70 miles an hour, overdrive top, with a 3.89 diff, letting enough air in to keep the mixture on the safe side of weak. Now, everyone says you've got to set up a DCOE on a rolling road. Problem with the rolling road is 250 quid a pop if you're lucky. So I built a rolling road. So I put an air fuel ratio sensor in the exhaust so that I could drive along and see exactly what my combustion was doing at any one time. Looking for weak spots, looking for lean spots, looking for rich spots. And when I did that, the progression hole weakness, when you just touch the throttle, boom, the engine goes lean, terribly, stutters. So obviously we had to richen that up. So playing with the idle jet fixed that. On this one, we have three components to it. We have a main jet, which pulls out, maybe. That's the main jet. Don't know whether the air corrector will come out with that pair of pliers, but these are just push spring fit. You can buy really cheap ones on eBay and they don't go in the hole. The air corrector comes out similarly, and you're left with this center bit, which is known as an emulsion tube. Now, emulsion tubes, they come in 25, 30 different designs. There is no consistency in the numbering. The original whole bay jetting was designed to work with an orange box and a pancake filter. As soon as you remove those, everything needs rejetting. So people take a whole bay manifold, stick it on an Alpine engine, and the engine runs like a dog. The reason being, the jets are all wrong. It runs too weak, you need to rejet. And rejetting is a combination of chemistry, mathematics, and experience. So jets come in numbers 100 to 200 in increments of 5. That represents the diameter of that tiny hole in the end, which you might be able to see. I don't think it'll stand, yeah. And you see, it's a metered hole. Don't drill them out, buy another one.
Now, Trevor, I know that you do a lot of work on people's carburetors. You do rebuilds and stuff. Can people just contact you and ask for a particular
Yeah,
rebuild?
I get a lot of, I say a lot, probably 15, 16 people now over the last few years who phoned up and said, my carburetors, or I bought this set of carbs, can you overhaul them? Or I've got these set of carbs and I can't tune them, can you help? So we did a remote tuning service for one of the guys with Harrington, and he was trying to get it running better. He'd spent several £100 on rolling roads and it was using fuel and not burning it properly. So we tuned it over email. So that was quite an interesting one. But yeah, I overhaul them, I refurbish them, and yeah, if people need theirs done properly, or if they're too scared, or if they've pulled something apart and it won't go back together, as you can see, I've got quite a few bits lying around.
Well, certainly, I think if people want it done properly, it's nice to have confidence in somebody that knows what
That's
they're
done
doing.
it before,
Yeah,
yeah.
done it before, used to race them, knows what he's doing.
I've done it wrong every way possible, so I must be able to get them in the right order this time. So that's the main jet assembly.
Brilliant.
Everything's duplicated, remember? There's a sort of choke on our DCOE. It's called a cold start device. It's not a choke as such. It's not a strangle plate.
Right.
Most chokes work with a strangle plate that restricts the flow and makes the engine suck more petrol in. What the cold start device on a Weber does is open a valve. And what it does is when you pull the choke cable, that's what happens mechanically. And what that does is physically lift this little thing, or this one. Remember, everything's doubled up, makes it look complicated. It opens a jet which lets fuel in directly by this big hole. So it literally floods the inlet with lots of petrol. Fine, it doesn't really work efficiently. You can't, it won't tick over with a little bit of choke like a traditional carburetor engine, but it gets the engine started. What most people who've been using Webers for a while do is to start the engine, you pump the throttle 4 or 5 times, which has squirted petrol in, then the engine starts. You blip the throttle until it's running, then once it's running, away you go. And that procedure is one of the peculiarities I like it about a Weber. You get in, squeeze the throttle 4 or 5 times, get it sputtering, spluttering and starting, and then you're away. On the racetrack, this cold start device has a terrible reputation. The problem is at high revs, when the engine's sucking like crazy, these valves tend to open just by the vacuum. and that messes up the mixture at high RPM. So you can get blanking plates to actually blank off this cold start, and a lot of times I will blank those out for somebody who's using their Weber's hill climbing or something. So we actually disable that part of the circuit. But I had an interesting problem on the last set of carbs. I don't know, can you zoom in and see the cog mesh here has got two little lines on it, exactly like a timing chain, cam sprocket and crankshaft sprocket. So you have to line up the teeth for the chain. This is direct, but I had one of these come in and they were out of line, so that the default rest position, one of these valves was open, and the owner was complaining that one of his plugs was jet black and he was only running on 3 cylinders, and somebody had assembled these one tooth out, and that's what those two little lines are for. They're supposed to be in line when your foot's off the when the cable is off. Yeah. It's easy enough to fix, but people don't know about that kind of thing. Now here's one that I don't know, I've never seen anyone else use it, but this is a standard cable, comes in here and pulls this way. On the engine, that involves the choke cable coming all the way round and coming in from the front. You can actually get left-handed versions of those that swap the action around and shorten the cable. So left-handed versions are available from Weber in Italy. They're not cheap. It's a beautifully engineered little bit of kit, but if you insist on using the cold start device, left-handed version or inverted version they're called, I can give you the eBay link for that. It's really useful.
Okay.
There you go. That's it. Carb stripped down. Now we've got to put it back together.
So do you have a sort of system of jet settings that you would say, oh, put this on an Alpine, it will run brilliantly? Or do you have a set standard? What's the score?
Yes and no. The big no is you jet a DCOE installation for how you drive and where you drive. If you're hill climbing, you'll need different jets for if you're racing on a track. If you're driving on the road in overdrive top, you'll need different sets of jets. You because the carburetor is so configurable, you optimize it for what you want from it. 70 miles an hour overdrive top on the motorway. What air filters have you got? Because the air filters make a huge difference. The whole bay was designed with the orange box and a pancake filter. If you take those off, the whole bay will not run. It's lumpy, it won't tick over. People complain that there's no power, it runs like a dog. The air filter restriction forms part of the tuning loop. And once you realize that, then you can get it to work. You can't just take an H120 or a GLS manifold and carburetor and stick it on an Alpine and expect it to work. It won't.
Trevor, I've heard of people who have taken just a whole bay head and the carburetors and stuck them on an Alpine. What's the situation there?
The whole bay head is much more efficient than the standard head, and it's a good idea. People want to do that. Problem is, the whole bay head has got different combustion chambers, far more efficient, and the volume of those combustion chambers is a lot bigger. So you stick it on an Alpine engine, the compression ratio drops quite low to sort of 8.4, 8.5 to 1. So it won't work just sticking it on an Alpine engine. The jets are wrong, compression's wrong. You need flat top pistons or over skim the whole bay head, which is what we did on a test on a Series 4 1725. We got an over skimmed whole bay head that nobody wanted because it wouldn't work on a standard engine, and we stuck them on diff pistons. Compression ratio back to 9.6, which is kind of where the whole bay was originally, and a big smile from the owner.
Well, Trevor, you've had a look round my car, Alpine. You know I've got the Club Weber carb with the forced induction. It runs very nicely. I mean, I get, I think my record's 42 miles a gallon. It goes
Excellent.
fast on the motorway, does everything I want. You're a racer. And I get a feeling that with these DCOEs, you'd probably burn me off. So what sort of miles per gallon do you get with these?
I've got a heavy right foot. I can get anywhere between 15 and 25 to the gallon, depending on how silly I'm being. I can get 28 to the gallon if I'm being very careful. My son's managed to get 30, 36 to the gallon on the motorway at 50 miles an hour through the roadworks. That's not fair, but he holds the record.
Yeah,
But
that's not what an Alpine was made for.
No,
is it?
expect to get 23 to 25. If you're getting less, it's because it's not tuned right.
Yeah, okay, that would make sense. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been really informative. It's been great. I'm
Been
sure
fun for me.
Well, I'm sure loads of people are going to contact you
Oh,
and
God.
ask for help and advice. And
Hi.
we'll put your details up now on the video, and hopefully everyone who's watched the video here has enjoyed it. This has been the Sunbeam Alpine channel, talking carburetors again. So please subscribe, click on the links to say you like it, and we'll see you next time when we'll probably be back at Oily Puddle's garage. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.